Hashem's loving grace, we're going to learn tonight eyes that see. We all have eyes, but the question is, do they see? And what do they see? So let's revisit Joseph and his brothers. We learned the Torah portion, the weekly Torah portion is like the rhythm of events and to this day. And it's the rhythm to learn about divine providence. So 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Joseph and his brothers. We're going to go back there. We'll go to this week's Torah portion also, the first chapter of Exodus. So in the last chapter of Genesis, we learned that Jacob, he died at the ripe old age of 147. Now the brothers are deathly afraid. Their father has died, and they live now in Egypt, and they attribute their welfare and their income to the good graces of their brother Joseph, who is now the vizier of all of Egypt. He's the second in command to Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is sitting and drinking his mint juleps and being fanned by his ladies, and Joseph is running the country. Okay, so they know that when Joseph was younger, they contemplated killing him, but instead they sold him into slavery, and this was the pinnacle of many years of contempt and deep hatred that they had for their brother Joseph, and a lot of jealousy. So the brothers thought that Joseph forgiving them and Joseph's conciliatory attitude, this was only in deference of his father, as long as the father was alive. So now that Jacob's not alive anymore, the brothers are worried. Oh, Joseph he's going to take revenge on us. Now that our father's not here anymore, Joseph will take revenge because Jacob died, and the brothers have just returned from burying him in Israel. Pharaoh gave them permission to go to Israel. They buried in the Machpelah cave in Hebron, where Abraham and Sarah are buried, and where Isaac and Rachel are buried. Now Joseph took Jacob to be buried there. That was Jacob's last will and testament, that Joseph should take him to Israel, land of Israel, and be buried there. Okay, so even though Pharaoh is the sole ruler of Egypt, Joseph is his vizier, and he's the de facto ruler that controls the economy and the military and all the matters of state. Nothing happens without Joseph. So the brothers feel that Joseph is going to utilize his power to harm them. And they could either starve them or kill them, as they plotted to do it. And they think. In Yiddish, there's an expression, "Af en gan was kop brennt de hittel." In other words, on the head of a thief, the hat burns. What does this mean? This means if someone is dishonest or someone has, it's projection, what the psychologists call projection. When someone has negative thoughts about someone else, they project those negative thoughts onto the other person, and they think that the other person has negative thoughts about them, but not necessarily. In other words, the negative thoughts that we think that other people have toward us, oftentimes it's projected. It's our own unclean thoughts within us. Okay, so they say Joseph is liable to hate us and repay us all the evil that we did to him. So the brothers are now seeing a very bleak picture. The brothers are looking at the reality. They all see the same reality. Jacob's no longer there. They're back in Egypt. They think they're dependent on the good graces of Joseph, and they see a bleak reality and a hopeless reality because they think that Joseph is going to treat them like they planned to treat Joseph. Okay. Stop and think. This is completely out of character for the sons of Jacob. Do you remember in Parshat Vayigash, in the Torah portion Vayigash, before the next to last portion, when Judah confronted Joseph, he didn't know that Joseph was Joseph yet. He still thought he was a vizier of Egypt. And he says, I'm not going to let you captivate my little brother Benjamin. Okay, we're going to fight to the end on this. If you do this is war. They were ready, 11 brothers, to declare war on the entire Egyptian army. It was it. And now what they do, they're shaking in their boots and they're inventing a white lie for the sake of peace in the family, as Rashi comments here. And they tell Joseph, they said, our father, he commanded before he died that you should forgive us and you should treat us nicely. Jacob never commanded anything like that. He never said anything like that. But the brothers are making light out of fear. And but they were so courageous. They were always courageous. Levi and Shimon, when they were bar mitzvah boys, they wiped out a whole Canaanite community because they raped their sister. And now they were all shaking their boots. No. Joseph tells them, put aside your fears. Joseph tells them, your fears are lack of Emuna. Put them all aside. And so we say, why are they so afraid? Let's ask so. Why are the brothers who are such heroes and such, if you take a Rambo and with the idea of a Rambo, it's not 1% of the sons of Jacob, the warriors they were. Okay. So what is happening to the sons of Jacob is they are going through a spell of spiritual blindness. This is the same spell that each one of us goes through the moment we see something negative. Because here's something axiomatic. There is nothing negative. Even if you think of the worst thing in the world, there's nothing negative. Because Hashem is a loving Father and Hashem does everything for our ultimate best. So we know that Hashem is a loving Father and everything comes from Hashem and Hashem loves us. It's all for the best. It's all for the best. So if we think that a situation is bad, quote, bad, unquote, it is spiritual blindness. This is the spiritual blindness that the brothers have at this moment. Okay, what's the spiritual blindness? They are now attributing power to Joseph. And Joseph says, hey, you don't have any power. I don't have any power. So he says, Hatachat Hashem, am I in place of Hashem? Okay, even if I did want to hurt you, even if I did want to take revenge, Joseph says, I can't do that because no one can touch a hair on your heads without divine decree. So Joseph goes a step further and he says, you had evil intentions. Listen, this is a quote right out of the Torah. This is for every one of us for posterity. Joseph said, you had evil intentions, but Hashem intended everything for the good so that this day he could sustain you. In other words, you thought you'd sold me down in slavery and that I would become a slave and you didn't know I'd be in Egypt. Did you ever dream that I would become the ruler of Egypt? Did you ever dream that I would be the one to provide you with food in years of famine? Never dreamed, okay? So we learn in this one passage at the end of the book of Genesis how to see Hashem. Okay, let's take a closer look at this. It's in chapter 50, verse 20. Chapter 50, verse 20, if you want to see it in Genesis. Joseph says, you had evil intentions against me, but Hashem intended everything for the good. And this, once again, cherished brothers and sisters, this is the message of posterity for every one of us, for every day of life. Now, here is what we learn from this passage, and it's a two-part principle we have to engrave on our hearts, and it has to be second nature. Just like we know our names, okay, we have to know this principle. The first, when a person does not see Hashem, a person sees bad. Okay, this evil inclination, this is the body, this is the physical world. Axiomatic, the spiritual world is all good. The physical world is very problematic. So when a person lacks the balance of seeing the spiritual world, the ruchnius, together with the physical world, the gashmius, then it's bad. In other words, when a person looks at the physical world, his outlook is negative. His outlook is pessimistic. And when the psychologists say, you've got to be an optimist, they've got to force themselves and maybe watch Mother Goose or Walt Disney or a football game to get some temporary optimism. And it'd go a step further, even take a pill, but it doesn't last. It's not lasting optimism. The only lasting optimism is spirituality and a connection with the Shem. That's all there is. And there could be, despite what all the atheists and the agnostics want to do, a person cannot have positivity in life without a connection to the Almighty. He says, oh, I know plenty of people that aren't religious and they're rich, they're whatnot. Oh, scratch the surface. See how much they're paying in alimony and how many ex-soulmates they have, and see what the other thing, and see how much they've lost in business. Maybe they've made $1 million, they've lost 10 million. You don't know. You don't know. Okay, so this enables us, this behooves us to learn about divine providence, because we see Joseph's brothers had Emuna, but they did not yet, they were not on the level yet where they attained the divine providence, the level of Emuna in divine providence that Joseph had, because Joseph went through a lot of suffering. What did Joseph go through all that suffering for? It all looks bad and bad and bad and bad. It was to uplift him, to uplift him, to uplift him, to prepare him for his future task. Okay, so the brothers harbored all types of negative feelings, and they attributed negative intentions to other people. They projected, and they had apprehensions that Joseph harmed them, because this is what they probably would have done in his place, what they felt. So without any attempt at being delicate, Joseph summarizes their thought process, and he said, puts it right in their face, you had evil intentions against me. It's true. They didn't want to kill him. And they made a compromise and threw him in a pit of snakes and scorpions. So they couldn't deny that fact. It was obvious. On the other hand, Joseph adopts an immediate conciliatory mood, and he says, but Hashem intended everything for the good. Okay, so now we learn the second part of a principle. We said without looking at spirituality, only look at the physical world, everything is bad. But now the second part, the opposite side, when a person sees Hashem, we open up our eyes to see Hashem. When we see Hashem, everything is good. Because when we know that everything in life comes from Hashem, and Hashem is our loving Father in heaven, then we realize that no matter what is happening in our lives, it's all for ultimate good. Because it's my Abba, it's my Tati, it's my father. He's doing it for me, okay? And everything that he does is intrinsically good. It doesn't matter whether it's a weakness, a sickness, an ailment. It's a Newton, every action has an equal and positive reaction. In other words, you have to have a recoil of a jet engine or a recoil of a howitzer in order to have forward thrust. And it's the same thing with us. In order to make growth, Hashem has to bring us into recoil mode. We go down and then we go up much higher than the down was. Okay, so how can we understand and tangibly internalize this principle? Now, we like to do things like we don't talk about Emuna, living room Emuna, salon, Friday night Emuna. No, Emuna, we have to learn it and put it ready to practice. In other words, like to teach that's intravenous. Teach intravenous Emuna, so we can right away apply it in our lives. Okay, let's remember how the brothers thought when doomsday had arrived. Okay, I can draw you a picture of current events in Israel, and it looks like doomsday. It looks like the end of the Jewish state. It looks like the end of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. There's threats from outside. There's threats from inside. Iran is about to pull the trigger. Iran is on the brink of an atomic outbreak. Within the country, there is not a non-religious, anti-religious coalition that wants to take apart the Rabbanut, that wants to outlaw kosherous, that wants to make any grocery store owner can perform conversion. Crazy, crazy, crazy things. Crazy things. And a person who involves himself in politics needs a sedative. If he's in politics or military, the person that reads the news in Israel really needs sedatives, can't go through the day. That's why another reason to learn Emuna. And then you see that no incoming flights, no outgoing flights. So it's a person that's an importer and exporter. He's got a big problem. He does business back and forth. It's another threat to his income. All types of people, all types of things happening. The USA and Israel, it's on the red list. You can't fly to USA, can't fly to Canada, can't fly to Italy, can't fly to France, can't fly to any of the African countries. It's 3/4 of the world is blacklisted. All right. It looks like doomsday. All right. So we have situations in life look like no hope. A person loses a job, heaven forbid. The doctor tells a person that a person is sick, heaven forbid. And so today I heard in Israel, a doctor told a woman that a friend of mine, another rabbi, who was at a Shiva house of the Moskowitz family, and Mrs. Moskowitz, she died of the nasty big C. And her husband told a story that 5 years ago, Mrs. Moskowitz was diagnosed with the nasty big C. For us, it's not 4-letter word, it's 6-letter word. We don't like to use the word that begins with C and ends with R. Okay, she was done that. So the doctor said, you better get your house in order because, madam, you've got very short time, not even a month. And here she is. She's left with 12 kids. She's got to make weddings and she's got to engage kids. She's got 12 kids, but she had an elderly mother. And she says, I'm going to make an insurance policy for myself. So the elderly mother, rather than putting in her elderly mother in hospice, she took care of her elderly mother. And half her day was taking care of her mother and half her day was taking care of herself. She was going back and forth between taking care of her mother and getting chemo treatments. Well, a month and a half ago, 6 weeks ago, the mother died. So Mrs. Moskowitz says, my insurance policy is up. It's up. And then here was earlier this week, she left the earth. The doctors told her she had 3 weeks to live. She decided that she would opt to do a major difficult mitzvah and take care of a mother. Honoring a mother, honoring your parents, this is off the charts mitzvah. By doing that, she extended her life for 5 years against all medical reason. And as soon as she said, she knew what she was doing. This was up. They took away. This is a story right out of the oven. Heard this today. And so we see the person does something good, and it changes. Hashem runs the world. Hashem runs the world. And if a person volunteers to bring so much good into the world, or another person, because here's the thing. Hashem doesn't let something happen to a person until he takes into consideration everything. Your family, your friends, your people. Okay, you happen to say, Hashem knows, all right, that he knows how much I love you, okay? So something happens to one of you, and Hashem says, wait a second, Rabbi Laser, he doesn't deserve that sorrow. So you're going to get saved because we learn together every week, and because you're part of the group, and they do something, you help me spread Emuna, this class gets seen all over the place. Okay. You see, Hashem takes into consideration everything before something happens to one of us. Okay. That's why it's good to bring only good in the world. All right. So even if you think it's doomsday, it might be doomsday looking for Mrs. Moskowitz. If she would listen to the doctor and internalize that the doctor says, madam, you have less than a month to live, it would have been doomsday. But no, that's not doomsday. Okay. So back when the brothers thought it was doomsday, what did they see? They didn't see Hashem. They saw a heartless Egyptian vizier who was about to take their little brother captive, and their little brother would be sentenced to slavery in the vizier's household. And they envisioned their elderly father, Jacob, dying of a heart attack when he heard that now he lost his second son. His first son, Joseph, disappeared. And Rachel, his wife Rachel, his beloved wife Rachel, only gave him 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Now he loses the second one? No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. So they were in a brink of a total war to kill or get killed. All the brothers knew either they are going to fight their way out of the palace and knock down all the army on the way, or else they're going to very soon get killed. This is on the brink of doomsday. What happens on the brink of doomsday? 2 words change the course of history. They changed the course of history in the Torah, they changed the course of history in the Jewish people, and they changed the course of history for every single one of us, and I'll explain to you why. The entire picture, it is now doomsday. It's about to be World War III in the Torah. Okay, the sons of Jacob against the Egyptian army, and there's going to be bloodshed. And it's either going to be Israelite blood or Egyptian blood, but it's not going to be, there's no peace treaty coming here. And Yosef sees that the red button is about to be pushed. The atomic weapons from back then are about to be pushed. And Yosef says, no, I can't let that happen. So Yosef says 2 words, Ani Yosef. I am Joseph. Oh, shocked. The Midrash tells us that if it weren't for Hashem, all the brothers would have had cardiac arrest right there. They didn't believe him. They were shocked. They couldn't say a word. They opened their mouths. They could not say a word. He says, I am Joseph. So this changes the whole thing. All of a sudden, at the bleakest of the bleak, on the edge of oblivion and the deepest darkness, it becomes the brightest light. It's a miraculous sense of salvation, because in the middle of a famine, that their brother is in charge of all the food in the world. There's only no food but in Egypt. And because of Joseph's handling the country, he stockpiled 7 years of bumper crops. And now there's food for the world. Okay. So what does Hashem do? Hashem shows that natural occurrence is nothing other than a big chessboard. And every occurrence that happens is Hashem moving a piece on the chessboard. Okay. So if you're somebody that doesn't know how to play chess, or somebody that's not what's his name, Boris Karpov, the international chess champion for Russia, can't preconceive the moves that the world champion chess champion is making on the thing. If we can't understand a chess champion, we can't understand Hashem. So imagine we've got a zillion piece puzzle, all these random pieces that don't make any sense. And comes glue, 2 words, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph, 3 words in English. Okay. The Bible is it saves words. Okay. It takes 50% more expression of verbiage that it does in English than it does in the Torah. Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. And it puts all these pieces together. Wow. And the whole picture makes sense. Rather than doomsday, we now see Hashem's hand and everything turned out for the good. Look what Hashem did. Who would ever thought of sending one of the brothers down to Egypt? And who would ever dream that a disdained Hebrew would become the second in command of all of Egypt? And Hashem had to do this by sending Joseph through prison and through slavery and through snake pits and scorpion pits. Unbelievable. He was sold into one caravan, a Midianite caravan, an Egyptian caravan, that sold back to Midianites, and sold back to Egyptians, that sold to Potiphar, the minister of Egypt. Wow. So what do our sages tell us? They tell us that the shock and embarrassment that the holy sons of Jacob had when they heard those two words, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph, our sages tell us, listen to this. Each one of us, we have a situation we think is no good. We have a situation where we think, Hashem's not being fair with us. We think all of us, in the Trail of Tranquility, old Isaac had one whole chapter about a peace treaty with Hashem, because we learned that. People think that Hashem is unfair with them. So what happens if the shock and embarrassment of hearing, I am Joseph? We learn in Kabbalah, and our sages tell us in the Midrash, that the moment a person leaves the human body, leaves this world, and his life in the physical world is over, right away the soul is free of the human body, which is a jail, and the soul, it's a tiny part of Hashem. You can see from one end of the other. And then the soul is revealed to the soul, this white light, and here's the voice, Ani Hashem. Oh my goodness. So the soul, says the Zohar, the soul gives a scream that can be heard from one end of the spiritual realm to the other end of the spiritual realm. That's a longer distance, from one end of the Milky Way galaxy to the other end of the Milky Way galaxy. So I need to come back. I need to come back. No, soul. No. You don't get to come back. You had plenty of time. You had 120 years to learn Emuna. You had 120 years to learn Bitachon. You had 120 years to learn Divine Providence, but you didn't want to do it. You didn't want to do it. Oh, you thought Rabbi Lazar's Emuna Hour, that was a bore and you had something better to do. So you watch the news and you don't want to learn it. Okay, it's too late now. Now's the time. Now's the time we learn Emuna. Now's the time, all of us, to hear. And this is the beginning, our sages tell us. This is the beginning of purgatory. It's not the fires of what they call Hell. No, the fires. Have you ever been embarrassed, so embarrassed you feel like your face flushing bright red? It's the soul blushes and flushes when the soul hears, oh my goodness. And the soul sees in retrospect how everything that Hashem did was loving kindness. Everything was the best. We don't understand. We don't know. Someone says to me all the time, here all the time, well, how could the Holocaust be for the best? I don't know. I don't profess to know, because I don't have Hashem's chessboard and I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. But it is. It is. We'll soon find out. Mashiach will tell us. And we're going to have a forerunning of that, just like I need Yosef. There's two Messiahs, Messiah, son of Joseph, and Messiah, son of David. And the Messiah is going to come and give us a taste of that. Ani Mashiach. I am Mashiach. And that's going to be really embarrassing, really embarrassing. So this is why we are learning now to save ourselves. Even to live a happier life in this world. We can see Hashem, we live a happier life, but to save us the embarrassment of the next world. And I'll show you something else. Some people, let's take two people that look at the same identical situation, okay? There's no change in reality whatsoever, but one person is happy and the other person is miserable. Okay, you have two people lying in a hospital. They have the same pain in the abdomen. They have the same 9 stitches in the abdomen. They both had emergency operation. They both have the same, if you put them on a pain meter, they have the same pain, but one is very happy and the other one is not. Why is the one that's happy? The one that's happy is because doctors took out appendicitis. They took out an afflicted appendix a minute before it burst. If that appendix would have burst, his body would have been full of toxins, exploded with toxins, and who knows if he could live. But the second guy, in the same place in his abdomen, he was walking in Central Park in Manhattan, and he was jumped by these thugs, and they stuck him with a knife. They stole his wallet, took his credit cards and $400 in cash and whatever. And he's miserable. He's miserable. Okay, so the first one understands what happened to him, that it was all for the good. The second one doesn't understand the rhyme or reason. Okay, now if the second one got the printout and realized that it would have had 30 million years in purgatory for stealing money from his customers and for whatnot, that this was an atonement for all this, we know axiomatically it's all for the good, but we don't have this printout. So when we don't know with our own logic, like we do with these two guys in the hospital in Manhattan, that's where we bring in Emuna. And that's where we bring in Emuna in Divine Providence. That the same Hashem that made John have the appendix attack, have the appendicitis, made Joe get mugged in Central Park. Okay, so we see an identical situation. One sees Hashem and one doesn't. Now let's go to this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, the first portion of the first chapter of Exodus. Okay, we learn about two women who could see. There's one thing, people, I hate when people say, oh, Judaism is a chauvinistic religion. No, it is known in Judaism that women are on a higher spiritual level than men. Known fact. Okay, and I know where we go lecturing around the world, it's usually, at least I don't remember seeing an audience that didn't have 60% women and 40% or less men. Women are truth seekers. Okay, so we learned this week's Torah portion. There are two women who could see Hashem. What does the Torah say? And guess what? The entire Jewish people owe their lives to these two women. Okay, and to prove it to you, they had total belief in divine providence. So what they succeeded in doing is turning tragedy into success. Now, these two women were Miriam and Yocheved, the sister of Moses and the mother of Moses. Miriam was Moses' sister, oldest sister, and Yocheved was Moses' mother. And the Torah refers to them as Shifra and Puah. They were midwives, and they had the nicknames of Shifra and Puah, because Shifra makes the baby, does everything good for the baby, and Puah shows how to coo the baby. That was their nicknames. Okay, they were the midwives of the Israelites in Egypt. So Pharaoh, after learning from his soothsayers that an Israelite male would overthrow him, Pharaoh gave a decree that every Jewish male that was born, every Israelite male, had to be thrown into the Nile. So Pharaoh summoned the two midwives. These are the head wives, these are the head doulas of the Jewish people, the Israelite people. Okay, so he summoned them to palace. Now imagine this. Here you are, okay, you're a midwife, and you're an important midwife. You're the main midwife in London General Hospital or in Sinai Hospital in New York, okay, and you get called into the governor's office. Not even the governor, the prime minister or the president, okay, and you get a direct order from the president, prime minister. And there's the police minister, and there's the head of the army, and you have these two women, the two head midwives, and you get this direct order. Imagine how scary that is. It's really, who could look at the pressure they were in. Here, they have to appear in the palace in front of Pharaoh, the tyrannical ruler of the world's greatest superpower at the time, and the ruler gives them a direct order with a veiled threat. Young ladies, every Israelite male is thrown into the Nile and becomes food for the crocodiles. This is what they hear. They do not answer. They do not answer. And they don't argue with Pharaoh, and they're not insolent with Pharaoh, and they're not cheeky with Pharaoh. They remain silent. Okay, you said Pharaoh. And in their hearts, Hashem, it's not for us, it's for you. There's a song like that we sing on Shabbos, no fadir, fadir. Everything for you is only for you, Hashem. It's all for you, Hashem. You got to take care of this. We have no power to take care of this. They threw it all in Hashem's lap. But what they do, they went back to work, and they did everything in their power to save every Jewish baby, male and female. Okay, they brought them into the world and maintained their health in the best possible way. Not just brought them into the world, they were slaves, made sure they had nourishing food. They did everything. They did everything they could to keep those babies alive. So Pharaoh hears about this. So he summons them again. Uh-oh. And again, the police minister and all the law enforcement ministers. And he said, how do you directly go against my decree? And Hashem put the words in their mouth. They said, Your Majesty, the Israelite women, they're not like this spoiled, delicate Egyptian women. The Israelite women, they're like animals in the field. Okay. By the time they give birth, well, we get there and the baby's born already and they're gone. They give it like animals in the field. So we ask ourselves, where in the world did these two midwives get the courage to look Pharaoh in the eyes and tell him a story like that and go against him, go against his decree without blinking an eyelash? No, okay, nervous and this and that. Maybe Pharaoh's got one of the soothsayers that can read body language and no, perfect calm. Perfect calm. Look at these heroic women. Don't say that the Torah showed them. No, the men. We say that the women, we should be on this level. So the Torah gives the answer. The Torah gives the answer where they got the power. If we open up the first chapter of Exodus to verse 17, if you want to write these down and you can check them out after the lesson, the Torah says, and the midwives feared the Lord, and they did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but kept the male children alive. Well, the Rashbam, he was one of Rashi's grandsons, one of the what we call the Balei Tosfot. He was one of Tosfot. The Rashi points out that this passage in Exodus 1:17, it's got a double meaning. Okay, there's a word in that passage in Hebrew. It's called vatir'ena. Vatir'ena. The same word means they feared, that they had awe of Hashem. They feared Hashem. And vatir'ena, and they saw Hashem. They saw Hashem. This is what the Torah is telling us. They had eyes that feared. And I saw this Rashbam, and when I was preparing tonight's lesson, I went to the Melitzer Rebbe, and I asked the Rebbe, I said, Rebbe, can we say that seeing Hashem, when you fear Hashem, it's like you see Hashem. And what gave me the idea, I said, I have a ploy for doing right. If I'm walking the street, I imagine that the Melitzer Rebbe is walking right with me. Okay, Laser, you're not going to say something improper. You're not going to look at what you're not supposed to look at. The Rebbe is right here with you. And the Rebbe laughed. He says that Rabbi Elimelech of Lezensky writes this, that a person has to feel like someone is standing over him and threatening him if he doesn't act right. But he said, it's true. It's true. It's a deliberate play on words, because when we fear Hashem, we see Hashem. And this we learn from Pua and Shifra, from Miriam and Yocheved. Okay, they did not even look at Pharaoh. They looked right through Pharaoh, and they focused their eyes on Hashem. Like King David says, Shiviti Hashem Lanegdi Tamid. They imagine the four letters of Hashem's name. Hashem, we only see you. We're not afraid of Pharaoh, afraid of you. We know that when we fear one, listen to this. When we fear one, we fear no one. Don't ever forget that. When we fear one, we fear no one. And this is Miriam and Yocheved. Okay. So by looking, if they would have looked at Pharaoh, it would have been doomsday, everything bad. But looking at Hashem, everything good. Hashem, we don't know how you're going to solve the problem. He did. Hashem gave them the courage. Hashem put the right words in their mouth. They didn't know what they're going to do with Pharaoh. They're not doing it, called the second time to summon at Pharaoh's palace second time. But they weren't the only ones, Shifra and Pur, that focused on Hashem. Now we'll talk about our anointed king, King David, the great-grandfather of Mashiach. King David in Psalm 25, verse 15, you know what he says? He says, my eyes are always toward Hashem. King David says he focuses on Hashem. You've heard me say several times, there is no individual in history that had a more difficult life than King David. King David was thrown out of the house when he was 3 years old. His father mistakenly thought that he was an illegitimate child. They would embarrass the family's honors. They would have killed him with their hands. They put him out in the desert so a lion and a bear would kill him. That's why King David learned how to use a slingshot so well as a shepherd. A little 3-year-old boy down in the Negev desert, the Judean desert, the northern Negev, has mountain lions and bears. He killed a bear and a mountain lion at 3 years old. And we see that he had the same prowess with Hashem was with him. And before his bar mitzvah, he killed Goliath, the biggest, mightiest warrior in the world. Okay, this King David, he saw nothing but Hashem. He didn't see fear. He saw nothing but Hashem. And it's what King David says in Psalm 23, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. How can you say fear no evil? King David, you're not afraid of ballistic weapons? I shall fear no evil because I don't look at the ballistic weapons. I only look at Hashem. That's what he says in Psalm 25. In Psalm 25, he explains to us what he says in Psalm 23, which is the most popular psalm maybe in history. Okay, so the moment, listen to this, you can be righteous from this moment on. The moment a person decides to focus on Hashem, you know what you are? You're called a righteous person. It doesn't matter what your past is. It doesn't matter what it is. The moment from this now, you say, I decide from right now, I'm going to focus on Hashem. You're a righteous person. The past does not matter. It's finished. You say one word, Hashem, I'm sorry for everything I did wrong in the past. I'm about to start a new beginning. Start a new beginning. This is a sign check from all our sages. At any moment, a person can start a new beginning. From this moment on, I'm only going to look at Hashem. In order to facilitate that, I'm going to strengthen my belief in divine presence. Okay, and this you right away. Okay, so what happens the moment you decide to look at Hashem? King David tells you that too. If we fast forward to Psalm 34, King David says, the eyes of Hashem are toward the righteous, and his ears are open to their call. It means that Hashem automatically hears their prayers, answers them, if the person is righteous. Because Hashem runs the world measure for measure. Next week, we're going to learn how Hashem is our shadow. And this is a sneak preview of next week's lesson. All right, but Hashem acts like a shadow. If we look at Hashem all the time, he looks at us all the time. And this is sometimes the divine providence, it's hidden, can't see it. But when a person that looks at Hashem all the time, it's right there. So this is eyes that see. Okay, so now you want to ask me a question. I'm anticipating your questions. We're talking about the eyes that see. All right. I'm not Levi's daughter, Yocheved. I'm not Moses' sister, Miriam. How do I get eyes that see? What do I do to get eyes to see? Give you an easy ploy. Easy ploy. How do you get eyes to see? What do you do when you sit down to eat a meal? You think, oh, I made that food because of my salary. I bought that food at the supermarket because I like it. It's tasteful to me. Stop and think that you had nothing to do with the food. Stop and think, look only to Hashem. Don't look at the supermarket. Don't look at the type of food. Don't look at whatever it is. Look at Hashem. Hashem put this food on my table. This is something that every one of us could do tangibly very next meal, the very next time we take a snack. Okay, so the next time we have a meal with bread, stop and think what you're about to eat. Look what Hashem did to give you that loaf of bread. Stop and think. There was a farmer that he plowed a field, and then he cultivated, and then he planted seeds. And Hashem, in a loving act of divine providence, he completely moved around nature. It's not nature, it's all a miracle, to make rain fall on those seeds. Because there were no rain on those seeds, they wouldn't germinate, they dry out. Okay, so now, look at the next miracle in line. The seeds germinate. But if we would uncover the seed before it grows into a wheat sprout, we'd say, oh my goodness, the seed is rotting in the ground. It's rotting. So what's Hashem doing? Hashem does a miraculous series of cellular differentiation that the rotten seed becomes a robust seedling, and the wheat plant will ultimately yield that one wheat seed planted becomes a wheat plant that will give 110 wheat seeds. It gives 5 heads, and each head has an average of 22 seeds. Okay, so out of this little seed comes 110. So back to the wheat. Now it's going to grow to maturity, and it'll be cut down, be harvested, and it goes to a mill, and it becomes flour, and the flour goes through an entire chain of distribution, and wholesaler and retailer. How many hands it goes through to get to you? Or either it reaches a bakery, and not a kilo of flour that reaches our pantry, we bake ourselves. So it doesn't matter who bakes the bread, but baking the bread goes to another series of making the dough and fermentation and baking. So look at the number of steps since plowing that field. Hashem engineers to bring a mundane loaf of bread to our table. Wow. See, Hashem, I'm about to partake of this fantastic miracle. You wouldn't believe, people ask me, well, why do I have to say grace before meals? I have to grace before your meals. It shows so that you don't become a total ingrate because you think of a sense of entitlement. A person has a sense of entitlement that's far away from Hashem. Okay, and that's why we say grace before meals and grace after meals. All right, so we can understand that by saying grace before meals and grace after meals, it allows us to see Hashem. Because what is grace before meals and grace after meals? Birkas Hamazon. And what's it say? It says, I didn't bring this. I'm thanking Hashem. I'm thanking Hashem for this food. Right. So I heard we have one of the most renowned spiritual guides in Israel, Rabbi Elimelech Biederman. He could really be a Rebbe in his own right. And we have with us in our group, Rebbetzin Berkowitz, her son-in-law. Her son-in-law works together with Rabbi Biederman. I heard from Rabbi Elimelech Biederman a beautiful, beautiful story. Beautiful story. And it's about seeing Hashem and about the power of grace before meals. Well, before World War II broke out, there was an elderly survivor here in Israel that was a student in the Lublin Yeshiva, Lublin in Poland, and it was headed by Rabbi Meir Shapira. Rabbi Meir Shapira, he's the one that introduced the daily page of Gemara that we all learn around the world. So customarily, in good times, the visiting Rosh Yeshiva, he would come and test the boys, and the boys that pass the test, he'd get trinkets, he'd give them little books or some kind of candies or something. But these were the pre-war years, and there was tremendous poverty. And Rabbi Meir, he didn't have anything to give to the boys, but there's one boy that passed his test beautifully. And Rabbi Meir, he told him, he says, I want you to be very careful. I have a great gift for you. I want you to be very careful in saying grace before meals and after meals with sincere intent. And this enables a person to feel Hashem's Hashgacha Pratis, Hashem's divine providence. Now, who knows what difficult situations you're going to be when you say grace after meals with intent that this will help your emuna, this will help your belief in divine providence. Okay. So the Yeshiva boy decided, he heard that from the great of the generation, Rabbi Meir Shapira, the Rosh Yeshiva of Lublin, he's going to do it. So he decided that no matter what he had, if he had a crumb of bread, if he had a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, he would say Birkat Hamazon, he would say grace after meals with total intent, and he would stop everything and just say it word after word. Well, a few short years after, this was maybe 1936, 3 years later, the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939. And the Jews were herded into cattle cars and into concentration camps. And the first stage of the concentration camp was the infamous selection. And the women and the children and the elderly and the weak, they were sent to the left. And the strong-bodied, the able-bodied were sent to the right. And they would go to the labor camps until they weren't worth anything anyway. They worked them to death. Okay, so the able-bodied went to slave labor. So this lad, this yeshiva boy, he was now, when Rabbi Meir of Lublin tested it, he was a 13-year-old boy in his first year in yeshiva. Now he's a 16-year-old lad. There's no more yeshiva because he's sent to concentration camp. And he's got a temporary stay of execution. So he was in line for selection, and he tried to erect himself tall, that he'd look older than his 16 years. Okay, so he didn't know what to do and say when the SS officer says, who are you, and do you have a profession? What are you able to do? He didn't know what to say. So he never did a day of manual labor in his life. So all of a sudden, he's getting closer, and he prays, Hashem, be with me. The Rosh Yeshiva promised that you'd always be with me. And especially if I say Birkat Hamazon, I've kept my end of the deal. Hashem, please be with me. So just then, as on cue from Hashem, a man behind him whispers in his ear and says, tell him that you're a cook and tell him that I'm your helper. And maybe we'll get assigned to the kitchen together. Well, he didn't think of that idea. That was from Hashem. Okay. So it worked. They were both sent to the kitchen and they were working together in the kitchen. So they had no problem in sustaining themselves. Even though the Nazis wouldn't give them food, They would eat potato peels all day long. You could live decent on potato peels. They had something to eat where other people didn't have anything. One day, there was an especially sadistic Nazi officer, and he entered the kitchen, and it irked him to see a Jew that wasn't emaciated and hungry. So he approached the young Jewish cook, and he put a small hammer, tiny little hammer in his hand. And he says, Jew, go behind the kitchen, and if you don't dig a 6 foot wide by 6 foot long ditch in the next 3 hours, I'm going to send you to hard labor with the other Jews. So even if he had a shovel and a proper pickaxe, the cook, he couldn't dig a ditch like that. So someone else might have lost hope. He didn't look at the Nazi officer. Just like Shifra and Puah did not look at Pharaoh. He looked at Hashem. And once again, he says, Hashem, our sages promised. I've kept my end of the deal. Hashem, there's not a single meal that I didn't say grace with intent. Stop. Hashem, please be with me. So he goes back and he's got this little hammer and cordoned off the ditch where he's got to dig 6 by 6. All of a sudden, a truck full of German soldiers ride by, and they see this young Jew with a forlorn look on his face, and they decide to have some fun. So they all grab, they had on the back of the truck, potatoes and dirt clogs, and they pellet the Jew with the potatoes and the dirt clogs. They throw at him, and he's bruised from head to toe. But then they drive on, and he's left with a pile of potatoes and dirt clogs. So he separates the potatoes from dirt clogs, and he's got a whole sack of potatoes, a whole sack of fresh picked potatoes, and they separate from the mud clods, and they drive away laughing. But he's bruised and bleeding a few places, but he's got this bag of potatoes. So what's going to be? It's part of the puzzle. Then a few minutes later comes another truck, and was a truck with a forced labor gang of Russian POWs. Okay, they were walking by. They were a forced march, not a truck, a forced march. They're walking by Russian prisoners of war that were out for hard labor, and they had pickaxe and shovel. And they're also all constantly hungry all the time. And so they saw this pile of potatoes, and they said, please give us some of them. So the young man said, no problem, you can have them all, but I need for you to dig me this 2 meter by 2 meter, 6 foot by 6 foot ditch. Okay, they got down with their head. Within 15 minutes, the ditch was dug. They dug the ditch, the soldiers, they took the POWs. So afterwards, the sadistic Nazi officer returns to the scene, and he sees what happened. He's astonished. He can't believe his eyes. And he curses the Jew, and he says, you cursed Jew. He says, I know that your God protects you, but I didn't know to what extent. He says, cursed him and says, go back in the kitchen, go back in the kitchen. So this young man survived the war, and he became an old man in Jerusalem, and he never lacked an income in all of Israel's difficult years and Israel war years, and he married off all his children, and he never had any debts. And as I was preparing this lesson and contemplating the story from the Holocaust, just this week, it declared officially there's all this panic. Israel has now entered its 5th wave of coronavirus, the Omicron. And today, reported the first deaths of Omicron. Some people say that's not the flu, that this, I'm not going into arguing about Omicron or no Omicron and vaccine, no vaccine. That doesn't interest me. I'm only talking about faith. I want to talk about Emuna. I want to talk about divine providence, right? But one thing we all know, that this problem where there's no tourism, poor guys in Israel, they're tourist guides, 4,000 tourist guides in Israel. They don't know where their meal's coming from tomorrow because tourism is locked up. I have my neighbor has a minibus that he drives tourists around. He's got no income. He's got all the people in Israel, they got no income. We now have challenges of income. We have challenges of health. So this is not just a little regular story from some storybook they told you about the Holocaust survivor. We look at Hashem. We look at Hashem. We look at Hashem. We don't look at coronavirus, and we look at Omicron, and we don't look at the Hashem. It's our employer doesn't give us our income, and not our job doesn't give us our income, comes from Hashem. And have to strengthen ourselves in Emuna. You read our book Bitachon, helps strengthen that. But when we look at Hashem's divine providence in everything, the worst bleak situation, as we talk all night tonight, comes into the best possible scenario. So when you look at Hashem, you'll see nothing but blessings and ultimate good, all your heart's wishes for the best, and things you can never believe. Amen.